Welcome. Welcome to the latest installment of the Run to Daylight show. I'm your host, Todd Burrows, and today I am joined by my former partner, good friend, and known person who comes at things from a different perspective than most by intention, Mark Garcia. You can find Mark on Twitter at Hilow, at Hilow FF. And it is always a pleasure to talk to Mark. We're going to do something we've never done before, which is I'm going to interview Mark now live here for my show. And we're going to pick his brain. And then we're going to switch over to the 1 week season bestball channel for the 1 week season subscribers. And Mark's going to interview me. So if you want to understand Mark's brain, just hang in there. You're going to get a pretty good taste of it over the next 45 minutes to an hour. Please excuse that I have just still moved in about a month ago. And frankly, I don't care about how my background looks as much as some people. But that is a good excuse for at least now. And then once we're done, we'll jump over. And if you're not a 1 week season subscriber, Mark will be able to tell you in a minute, be able to catch that episode as well. This episode is brought to you by our friends at the FFPC. You can go to myffpc.com, use the code DAYLIGHT, and save $25 on your first league. Considering leagues start at $35, tight end premium, 2 wide receivers, 2 flexes. My favorite place to play is the FFPC. We're going to mostly talk about high-level best ball mania stuff with Mark today, but maybe Mark will interview me a little bit about some of my strategies for the FFPC. You like season long? You like dynasty? The FFPC has 2 $1 million first prizes for season long and has been the go-to dynasty place for a long time now. Again, go to myffpc.com, use the code DAYLIGHT. And Mark, welcome to my show.
What's going on, man? I was interested to see which...
We've both moved since the last time we've talked.
We did, dude. Yeah, you moved cross town, I moved cross country. But we're in a new location. My background, I'm literally like in a closet right now because it's the safest place away from the kids. So
you need a 1 week season banner in that closet.
I know, dude. It's gonna get it's on my list of things to do before the season starts. So I'll get it.
Where else are you working this year? I know you're kind of like the old Saturday Night Live Jamaican skit, a man with many jobs. Where else besides 1 week season can people find you?
I'm over at NBC Sports still, and then also 4 for 4 and Fantasy Points.
Fantasy Points, one of my favorites. Scott has done just a stellar job over there, I think. I mean, the people he's brought in, the information, how they go about it. Big fan of, I had Neil Orfield on the other day.
Yeah, good dude.
You know, I'm a big fan of what they're doing over at Fantasy Points. And of course, even though I had some bad feelings towards 1 week season at the time of my departure, those have long departed. And I'm still a member over at 1 week season. I will always be a member at 1 week season and looking forward to week 1 DFS, breakdown JM to win. And then, of course, you and what's his name?
Mike.
No, the weekly show that you do.
Oh, Zandomir.
There you go. Really good high-level stuff. Mark, my first question for you is kind of a loaded gun. You have, been known to attack Best Ball Mania in ways that are way different than most people do. You look for edges. One question I'm going to want you to ask me when we switch over is how am I adapting to the best ball tournament structure this year, because I do have some ideas on that. I don't want to spoil that thunder by talking about it now, but talk about some of your unique ways. Like, I think I remember 2 years ago, by July 15th, you had done all 150 of your best ball manias. What are your thoughts go over some of the things you've done in the past, what you've learned, and how that is, how are you adapting that to your strategy for this year?
Yeah, so I'm the game theory guy, right? So I did a lot of personal development in game theory, and it kind of led me down this path of like, I love trying to find edges in new games. So without getting into like all of the game theory stuff, because you can find my work over at 1 Week Season for that. It's effectively
how much is a sub to the best ball product, Mark?
There's a baseline product that's $29, and now we just lowered the Best Ball Plus product to $79. So that'll get you access to all the like theoretical behind the scenes type stuff over there. So $79 for the rest of the off season. Yeah,
awesome. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this Best Ball Mania and Best Ball and these big tournaments in Best Ball land are still very, very new games. So I like to look to the theory to help guide my decision-making processes and my game plan development and how I'm going to attack these games. And a lot of it comes down to like, we have to know we have to know the contest, the structure, the payouts. So like, what do we win when we're right? We have to know the basics of like best ball. So like, we have like theoretically optimal processes that are mathematically backed. In an 18-round draft, we know that 3-5-8-2 and 2-5-8-3 roster constructions, for example, carry the highest expected value. We know that we have basic guidelines like through the first 7 rounds, which are the most valuable rounds in those drafts. We should probably have 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers at that point through the first 7 rounds. But these are all just guidelines, and we know that these are mathematically backed to give us the highest expected value. Beyond that, we get into this like theoretical concept of field observation. So like, what is everybody else doing? And in doing so, we kind of are looking to build these deviations away from that optimal theory to give us some boost to expected value in the end. So there's a lot of things in the BBM that just by looking at other drafts, the drafts you're in, kind of observing what other people are doing, we can kind of do to increase our expected value. And a lot of it comes down to those playoff rounds, because there's really like pretty much the only thing that we can like specifically control in these contests is advancement rate, right? Beyond that, there's so much variance. Pod luck, week 15, week 16, advanced stuff. It's very, very hard to control that stuff beyond advancement rate.
You can't.
Right.
You can't control it, but you can put yourself in a better position to navigate it.
Right. And so that's where a lot of my focus is we have to understand like where the expected value comes from the BBM. The primary contributor is week 17. But yes, we have to advance first. We have to get through week 15. We have to get through week 16. A lot of that comes down to variance. A lot of that comes down to injury luck, pod luck, all kinds of stuff. So if we are optimizing for week 17, and I feel like the field isn't doing this enough, we have to be optimizing for what gives us the highest expected value, which is week 17. And like, we know by now, like, okay, game stacks, team stacks, we kind of understand all that at this point, but we're not, and I say we, like the field is not bringing in like DFS, like concepts enough into their BBM builds. And what I mean by that is I'll just use some broad numbers examples over the last 5 seasons. Over the last 5 seasons in the Millie Maker, about 22% of the time, a tight end is included in a primary stack in the winner. About 22% of the time, a running back is included in the primary stack of the Millie Maker winner. And obviously, we're not trying to build Millie Maker winning rosters through BBM, through best ball, but that's just an example of like things that the field is not doing enough of to kind of boost your expected value where it matters most. So I'm really looking for running back inclusion in primary stacks. I'm really looking for tight end inclusion in primary stacks. another example, just off the cuff, if we look at over the past 2 seasons, a bring back in the Millie Maker, so like your primary stack and then their opponent, a bring back in the Millie Maker was only utilized under 20% of the time. So like we kind of have in DFS this overemphasis on like bringbacks or game stacks. So I think like just focusing on team stacks, including like running backs, tight ends in that process, will give you boosts to expected value if we make week 17 where all the money is made. So just some like theoretical stuff.
That is the most rational. Like normally, like I always joke with you, you're trying to invent the question mark, right?
Yeah.
Like that is the most rational, because when you and I did podcasts together, besides my great sense of humor, what made those shows to me was the fact that kind of I was this more traditional guy and you were more this untraditional guy. And we would both at the end of the show look at each other and go, I'm smarter for having put myself with somebody who's different than I am.
Yeah,
right?
It was a yin yang for sure.
Yeah. But when you interview me, I'm going to make sure I'll hint at a couple things here, but when you just covered a lot of what I want to cover when you interview me. But what I will say is this morning I was studying the Spike Week tools. I highly recommend, if you want to take best ball serious, Spike Week. The Discord is fire. But I was just looking at all the starting quarterbacks. So I've done I can't see everything, but I can see all my drafts. And in 200 and something drafts that I've done so far this year, I was looking at both how often the key guys in week 17, like Puka Nacua, and who do the Rams play again? Now I can't think of it. Give me a sec.
Sorry, what was the question? I was like,
who do the Rams play week 17?
Oh God,
I got it. It's right here. Hold on. The Falcons. So you would think, Puka, an average, if you've got like the 8th pick, the average 13th guy for the will be, the comeback by ADP is 15 to 18%. So you would think with game stacking, especially that early, that Drake London and Puka would be somewhere in the mid to high 20s, right? That there would be a 5 to 7% boost with people trying to get that natural week 17 correlation. And in my drafts, at least, it isn't there. He's right around what you would expect, not the high end of what you normally would expect. So I do think game stacking week 17 matters. Where I've changed from last year is I'm not chasing it at all, right? I'll do it when it makes sense and it's right in front of my face. But to your point, I don't know that it's worth chasing it.
Yeah, and I think the field has just gone a little bit overboard with it.
But that's not what I'm seeing. But the other thing that you mentioned that I studied, I went through every quarterback and their main 1 or 2 targets. And if there's only 1 or 2 and that quarterback can be drafted after the 4th round, right? It's harder to do it if the weapons and the quarterback are all drafted early. But like Dak and CD, mid to high 40s, Dak lineups have CD Lamb, or CD Lamb lineups have Dak, right? So where I've kind of come along based on my study is I do think there's value in adding that later guy, that third piece. That's something Zandermeer has always talked about for DFS. If you have the main stack, it's going to be 30, 40% owned. You just put in one other piece, and then that goes down to about 4 or 5%.
I did similar study. I have some stuff in the hopper. I don't want to spoil it. But I did study on how often a skill position player was brought with his quarterback, a top 2 finishing quarterback. So I looked at the top 2 finishing quarterbacks. Obviously, best ball, we want the spike week potential. So I just looked at the top 2 quarterback scores on a given week over the last 2 seasons. And about 63% of the time, a quarterback that finished in the top 2 also brought a pass catcher that finished in the top 6 at his position. And about 40% of the time, a quarterback that finished top 2 also brought a skill position player that finished in the top 3 at his position.
So let me ask you, I'm going to interrupt to ask you a key question. Did your study figure out how often it was the number 1, how often it was the number 2, how often it was the number 3 target, whether it's wide receiver or tight end?
I have the data. I have not processed that. Yeah, I haven't,
because that would be super interesting.
Also, but about 30% of the time, it was multiple players finishing in the top 6. So a team overstack, we'll say, or a heavy team stack, however you want to conceptualize that. 2 or more skill position players. So that is probably utilized at a lower rate than it should be in best ball drafts as well. People have this like negative connotation to overstacking a team where like, oh, they can't all hit in the same week. Well, it's like, yeah, they cannot all hit in the same week, or they're unlikely to. But I mean, a couple of times last year with the Lions, like Jahmyr Gibbs and Amon-Ra St. Brown or Jameson Williams or Sam Laporta were hitting together. And that's an interesting team to me too this year, because the Lions, like, their offensive line got worse, their defense got worse. We could see this team airing the football out a lot more than they were in previous seasons with Ben Johnson at the helm. So a little tangent there, but like back to the data.
Well, I want to talk on that tangent because again, often we end up on the different end of the spectrum and we need to talk through it. So my feeling is, because in DFS, salary matters, right? How much you invest in each player absolutely matters, because it's not how many points you score necessarily, it's how many points per dollar you score. Best ball is no different. Historically, it has not been smart to make a 3-player best ball stack with the number 1, number 2, and the quarterback option if those options are expensive, right?
Yes.
However, taking that third guy who could end up with an injury being the second guy with the first guy or with the second guy has been plus EV. So the Lions, to me, are a team this year that are really, really expensive. You're not getting a discount on any of these guys. Even Sam Laporta, who goes a little later, I could make an argument that there's 5 to 7 tight ends I like just as much who go later. So other than Gibbs, who I think has that I can break fantasy potential, I'm lower on Lions, and I'm more because the offensive line isn't as good, and Jared Goff has been historically a guy who, if he's not protected, his confidence can go down. So your thoughts on my thoughts?
I think there has to be a distinction made based on the format in this discussion, because we have to look at like field tendencies and see how often the field is doing certain things to base our decision-making process around as well. So like in cumulative scoring, I think you're probably right. So like on drafters or like the marathon on Underdog, these contests where it's cumulative scoring throughout the year, I think the Lions offense might be a little bit overpriced. But when we're talking about a playoff format style contest where week 15, week 16, week 17 are where all the expected value comes from, we kind of have to shift our mindset a little bit, I think. And so we're moving away from, so I'll bring an example.
I think that's a fair, I definitely think that's a fair pushback.
Yeah. So I'll bring an example to kind of highlight what I'm talking about. We'll use the Dolphins as the example, the working example for this. Probably Tyreek Hill, now that he's moved up into the mid-second round, he's probably appropriately priced. Devon A. Chan is probably appropriately priced for like cumulative scoring at the 1-2 turn. Jalen Waddle is probably appropriately priced in like cumulative scoring. Like if we just looked at median projection where his ADP is, he's probably appropriately priced in the middle of the 5th round, the early 5th round, somewhere around there. But if we also look at like their ADP in a contest like the BBM, it has been extremely difficult, and you'd have to reach in ADP in high value rounds to pair Devon Achane with Tyreek Hill. So how much of the field is doing that? What percentage of the rosters in play in this contest are going to have both Devon Achane and Tyreek Hill? It's probably going to be sub 1%, if I had to guess.
Yeah.
Because their ADPs have never aligned. Like Tyreek Hill used to go in the mid 3rd round, but he moved up now to the mid to late 2nd round. And during that movement, Devon Achane was also moving up from the mid to late 2nd round to now like the 1-2 turn. So like their ADPs never aligned. And it feels.
And I have to say, you don't have to do this 1,000 times.
No.
Right? Like, something that, again, we talk about this in the Spike Week, combinations Discord. I definitely think that's a great idea. Like if I do 150 BBMs to have 2 or 3 teams with Achane and Tyreek Hill, if one of those get through to the finals, you're
the only one.
And again, when we get to you interview me, a lot of what I've been thinking about is how to be unique in the finals without, going crazy and doing things that are so against what value is that it's not worth trying. Right.
Yeah.
And pushing up an early 3rd round guy to the 2nd round, to take Tyreek Hill at, like take Achane at 110 and Tyreek at 2-3, you're not really giving up all that much.
Yeah. So that's an interesting point. And like in this discussion of deviations away from optimal, if we ran a simulation on an infinite timescale of the 2025 season and we just looked at like how it would spit out an optimal way to attack that contest it would be to completely randomize within tiers. And it would be sticking close to ADP, and it would be not reaching beyond tiers to make that happen. The problem is we don't have an infinite sample size. We have a sample size of 1, which means the variance is borderline infinite. And when we're talking about a deviation, like taking Tyreek Hill and Devon Achane would be a deviation away from that optimal theory because we are reaching so far in ADP to make it happen in those highly valuable rounds. So any deviation away from optimal theory, going back to how it pertains to expected value,
it matters.
It matters. So any deviation away from ADP or from optimal theory is going to incur a hit in expected value. Just theoretically speaking, any game you play, like say any deviation away from perfectly 33% throwing rock, paper, scissors in the game of rock, paper, scissors is going to be a deviation away from optimal. So like that is going to incur a hit in expected value. The goal and what we're trying to do here, with talking about game theory, is we want the deviation to boost expected value greater than the loss from the deviation itself. And that is what is called an exploit or an exploitation. So we have to like bring in field observations. We have to see at what rate people are doing things. So like back to the example of the tight ends and the running backs, people are not including tight ends and running backs in their primary stacks in best ball at a 22% frequency. I can guarantee that. So that is saying like, if I do that at a frequency greater than 22%, I am boosting my expected value. And now the deviation, it's supposed to offset the hit in expected value from the deviation itself. So like back to the Dolphins and like Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane, if the field is doing that at a sub 1% frequency, because it's very hard to do in the 1st and 2nd round, you would have to say like, if I do that 4 or 5% on my rosters, now like that could boost expected value greater than the deviation or the hit from the deviation itself. So like, well, that's what we're trying to do.
And that's when to do it, right?
Yeah.
So to be clear.
So doing it on the Dolphins is much better than doing it on the Bengals. Cause like everyone and their mother is trying to get like a Bengals stack.
Well,
and everything.
I mean, it's obvious because you can get Higgins with Chase pretty much any draft.
Their ADPs have aligned the entire draft season.
Yeah, and that is one of the key things. But the other thing that I always talk about, is win rates, right? Back to MFL 10s. Well, now it's called advance rates. You said most of your expected value comes from advance rate. One of the things
second highest contributor.
I gave up way too much advance rate last year. I just bled it. And I'll on your show, we'll talk about how I did it and why I'm not doing it that way anymore.
Yeah.
But you would think that the best win rates and advance rates would come from those guys late in drafts who just have these amazing seasons, right? Historically, the best win rates come from first and second round players. It comes from a combination of the best players doing what they're supposed to do while the other best players around them fail.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you had last year, like if you had a couple years ago, I forget, I can't remember the example, but if you've got the second pick in the draft and you take the guy who's supposed to go second, and the guy who went first and the guy who went third and the guy who went fourth all either got injured or had bad years, your win rate alone is going to be super high just off of that, right?
And there were a lot of landmines last year.
If you every year you go back, every year the top win rates come in the first and second rounds. You might get a couple other places that are almost as high, but every single year, like Barkley, last year, Barkley and Henry, second and third round, highest win rates. But where you really supercharge it is when you can then also match your first and second round picks and both of them crush. And you've got a variety of people around them who fail. That's when you get over 50, 60%. So to change it up like you describe early, if you nail that, right? If Tyreek is Tyreek and his value ends up being top 5 and he's mostly drafted at the end of the second round, but the guys he's normally drafted with, the top 3 guys all are just okay, but Achane crushes also, your win rate on those teams would just be through the roof.
Yeah.
As well as being unique. So my point is, doing what you're doing, the time to do it is early more than late to push up.
Yes, and that's a very important distinction too, is because we have this moving target of ADP. Like ADP is fluid from the time that the contest starts until the last draft on September 7th or 8th or right before the kickoff of the regular season, right? And what makes ADP more accurate is volume. And so as we continue on in the draft cycle, ADP is going to get more accurate and more accurate the closer we get to the start of the NFL season. So I take all kinds of ADP deviations and do all this funky shit early on in the draft cycle because I know that like ADP is going to get more fluid. And theoretically speaking, back to the theory stuff, our draft strategies would have to change depending on where we are in the draft cycle. I call like the time we can draft these contests the overall draft cycle. So you're not going to draft a BBM team the same in late May as you would in early September.
It's funny you mentioned that because that was a weakness in my game. And I've got some theories on how I'm going to draft my later teams a lot differently this year.
Yeah, theoretically speaking, because
also I just want to throw in, and where you're talking about ADP and locking in, where ADP is the most locked in is early in drafts.
Right.
It's where people just don't take chances.
Right. So that is why you see sub 1% Devon Achane paired with Tyreek Hill. Like we are more married to ADP because ADP in the first 3 rounds doesn't move as much as the later rounds. I mean, we've seen Tyreek Hill has been a mover up about 3/4 of a round. Devon Achane about 3/4 of a round. But outside of that, like there hasn't been a ton of movement at the top. Like Justin Jefferson started like ADP 2, he's now ADP 4. That's typically like kind of what we see in these first 3 rounds because they are so. Those players are the players that
That's
can
weird.
finish.
I just looked it up again. Spike Week tools.
Mm-hmm.
Achane and Tyreek are on 6% of my 248 teams.
Okay, so that's like
Waddle, who you would think would be a lot more, 6%.
Mm-hmm.
Tua, 8% with Achane. Tyreek and Tua, 33%. How many of those teams have all? So it's interesting that some people have actually done what you. That's way higher than I thought it would be, Mark.
Yeah, it is. And
But
is
that
that
is the
field
value
tendency, or
of
is
the
that
Spike
you?
Week tools.
That's the entire field, or that's just you?
Well, that I can only, and it's only right that maybe with DraftKings you could see everything because they released info, but it would not be right for Spike Week to allow me to see everyone's information.
Okay, yeah, you would need
But
access
I
to
can
CSVs.
see mine, so it's based only on my 248 drafts so far.
So you're leveraged.
No, I don't have it. This is my opponent.
Oh, in the drafts. Okay, I see.
All right.
All
So in 248 drafts, somebody, not me, I don't think I might have done it once. I
was in
can
your
look at
drafts then.
me, but it doesn't make it not good to do, right? Because that's 6% among every draft. Here, let me switch over. I can also look at it by contest. Let me switch over to BBM. Now, I haven't done as many BBMs, but in BBMs, it's I've done 79 so far, and it's 40. It's 3% Tyreek with Achane.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit closer to what I would think it would be in the BBM.
Yeah.
But yeah, like back to this like discussion.
Didn't mean to steal your thunder.
No.
I
You're
still
totally
think
fine.
I think the thought process behind it. But the great thing is with Spike Week, I can actually analyze it and see how unique it is.
Yeah, for sure.
And the other theory is, I always think I can build better teams than that other, the other people that are doing it.
Specifically pertaining to advancement rate.
Correct.
Yeah. In that discussion of like the ADP and how we optimize like our game plan for attacking a contest, as we get closer to where ADP is going to be most optimal, the theoretical optimal way to draft is that randomized within tiers. So that's what I preach is like, as we get closer to the start of the NFL season and ADP becomes more, it'll never be optimal. Like ADP will never go to fully a balanced state. In game theory, we call it a Nash equilibrium. It'll never, so like, I don't want to get into the nerdy, too much of the nerdy shit, but like Nash equilibrium is where no player can generate an advantage over another player if everyone is playing optimally. And if we assume that one of the inputs into that equation in best ball is like ADP being optimal as we get closer to the end of the draft cycle, we would then say, how am I going to, it would be akin to every player that you're playing rock, paper, scissors is throwing 33.3% rock, paper, and scissors at a randomized state. To play a player like that, you would also throw 33.3% rock, paper, and scissors. You could not generate an edge over any player, and that would be a state of Nash equilibrium. So like if we assume that ADP is now closer to Nash equilibrium, we would say as we get closer in September, we would want to be randomizing our picks in tiers. And then the guidelines for that still exist. So like we want to be close to 2-5-8-3, 3-5-8-2 builds. We want to have 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers through the first 7 rounds. And that is the time where we want to be playing quote unquote like game theory optimal. So like
So hold on. Give those two builds again.
2583 and 3582 carry the highest EV for advancement rate.
Yes. And I've been doing a lot more 2.6, 8.2 this year. And the reason is historically, you can crush 2.5 if you nail that late running back. If you get that, if you have 20, like 1 year in MFL 10s, I had a way higher advance rate with that extra running back, but I was using that extra running back on Rex Burkhead that year.
Yeah.
When he had one of his big years with the Patriots from the 16th or 17th round.
Yeah, I remember that.
If you miss on that guy, you have to realize that you are bleeding. It really is an either or. You either supercharge your advance rates or you bleed it. So that I'll give this one up. This was one I was going to talk about in yours. One of my key strategies is going to be to pivot, because right now, while there's a lot of unknown in these running back situations, you can get Brashard Smith. There's a lot of Kyle Monangi. There are a lot of really good backup running backs who you can get in the 18th, 17th round, who if Elijah Mitchell, who if we find out that they're the number 2, they're going to be 14th, 13th round picks down the stretch, right? As that information fills in, it takes away the value of guessing on that last running back. That's been one of my big takeaways this year.
Yeah, and those guys are very interesting to me for how the field is kind of viewing them. I like to use those guys in 0 RB builds or hero RB builds where if one of them hits, now they're contributing consistently, or at least consistently where it matters most. So say like Saquon Barkley is injured in week 13 or 14. Now you get Will Shipley like where it matters most, weeks 15, 16, 17, and he's probably has a floor of like an RB2 in that offense. Maybe not a perfect example, because I think if Saquon Barkley were injured this year, we would just see the Eagles tilt a little bit more pass heavy. They have AJ Brown, they have like all these Devontae Smith, they have all these players like it's extremely good.
Well, you mentioned adding a running back. One of my favorite things to do is to take Hurts and Will Shipley together.
Yes.
Because and again, I don't want to go into it too much until we get to your pod, but that is something that I've been laser focused on this year. And that's a situation where you get a double benefit, because not only do you get the advantage of the backup running back with the quarterback, and how that can help you with pod luck, but you also get the fact that Hurts is going to throw a lot more if Barkley goes down. So you're getting a double advantage.
Yes. And that's leveraging the variance that is associated with injuries, and doing it in a way that boosts expected value already. So I love that. Other examples like Marshawn Lloyd in Green Bay, pairing him with Jordan Love and a pass catcher like Matthew Golden or Jaden Reed or
that's
Tucker
one where
Kraft.
you could really get a 4-person stack. It's so easy to get 2 of those catching options with Love late and then throw in Marshawn Lloyd.
Yeah. So we want to be doing that on like offenses that we expect to be good offenses, right? So like getting the backup running back on the Cleveland Browns, right? Or getting the backup running back on the New Orleans Saints, even though I'm high on the New Orleans Saints, like probably doesn't mean as much as getting the backup right on the Buffalo Bills, or the Kansas City Chiefs. Probably not a good example because they have such high pass rates, or the Miami Dolphins I'm high on. So like Jalen Wright, the Philadelphia Eagles, we're looking at like, we want to be targeting backup running backs that can really make a difference for us where it matters most. And that's most likely to be in the top half of projected scoring for the 2025 season.
Yeah. I again, I don't want to give away too much of the show, but that's something I really want to go into when you interview me. Something a key, ask me what some of my key mistakes were last year.
Got it.
And I think this is all really good stuff. I definitely agree with pulling up people early. That's something Hayden Winks has talked about. We talk about it in Spike Week. Pulling up people and messing up that early ADP should be done a lot more than it is. Just to give you I'm going to go back to this form, and I'm going to make it with all teams.
One of my favorite things
Go
to
ahead,
do
talk.
early in the draft cycle, so like you can't really do it as much anymore, is go like extreme wide receiver heavy early in drafts, like early in the draft cycle, and get those unique combinations. And one of the ones that I was hammering was either Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson or CeeDee Lamb, so one of the top 3 wide receivers off the board, with both Tyreek Hill and Garrett Wilson. Like players that could realistically all finish at the top 6 in their position. And you can't really do that anymore because Tyreek Hill has moved, because Garrett Wilson has kind of moved the other way, and people are so rigid in ADP. Like Garrett Wilson, I would not be shocked if he ended the 2025 season as like the target leader. I would not be shocked if he found 170 targets this year.
Who?
Garrett Wilson.
I don't think it'll be that high. I don't think it needs to be that high. Jamar Chase, 12% with Jonathan Taylor, 13% with Tyreek Hill, 13% with Bucky Irving, 28% with T. Higgins, 23% with Josh Jacobs, 19% with Chase Brown, 25% with Trey McBride, 16% with Marvin Harrison, 13% with Garrett Wilson. And then there's a cliff. 3% with Devontae Adams, 3% with Josh Allen, 2% with Lamar Jackson, 4% with Jackson Smith and Jigba, 2% with Breece Hall, 1% with Kyron Williams. So basically, and that's just one example of how sticky ADP is. That if you're matching, and you can still take one of those guys with Chase and just bring in one of those 3 and 4% guys, and your team is already wildly different than most of the Chase teams out there.
And the trick there is like you're boosting your expected value for the money rounds for weeks 15, 16, and 17, but you are taking a hit, theoretically speaking, in advancement rate. So we have to advance. So the trick is, if you're doing this, now you're not doing like crazy bonkers shit like 3 running back builds or 4 running back builds. You are sticking closer to optimal theory for the rest of the draft because we have to worry about advancement rate. So like if I'm doing these funky things in the first 3 rounds, you can bet your bottom dollar it'll probably be on a 2583 or a 3582 build, because I want to be closer to optimal with the rest of it, because we have to worry about advancement rate still, because that deviation is going to affect advancement rate the most.
It's interesting to me because you were not always an advancement rate guy, when we would talk in the past. And I historically was huge on advancement rate, and especially on the FFPC, where the tournament rounds are way less hard to advance. In the FFPC, it's week 15, 16 are 2 of 12, 3 of 12. Right? I don't need to reinvent the wheel in that case. I need the best team that I can have. Right? I need points out of all my positions. And then you get to an 80-man final versus a 400-man, 500-man final. But yeah, I one of my big takeaways is I drifted way too far. I got way too cute building last year.
Yeah.
And I went from advance rate means a ton to advance rate almost means nothing, because I'm just trying to create this one team, this lucky sperm that is going to, find the egg, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the answer is somewhere in the middle.
I think it is too. And I've come the other way. Week 17 was all that matters. And I've come the other way. And it all comes down to the hierarchy of expected value. Like, where does the expected value come from in these playoff style formats? Week 7 in BBM, week 17 is the highest contributor to expected value. But not too far, not too distant second is advancement rate. And then it's week 16, and then it's week 15. That is where the money
and
the
week
expected
15
value.
and 16 are, because they're limited, somewhere between 12 and 18 teams typically, right? Mm-hmm. 1 in 12, 1 in 18 shot. It's the one where luck is going to play the most. You need to get lucky week 15, week 16. So I legitimately don't think about it this year. I just, let me build as many good advancing teams as I can, and let me make it so that week 17 I'm a little bit unique. That's been my main theory this year.
Yeah, and I think theoretically speaking that is correct, because the two highest contributors to expected value are week 17 and advancement.
To see you come this far toward where I used to be, where last year I kind of went more toward where you had been, I think is incredibly interesting. And it's something we should talk more about as we get there. I've got one other question for you, but before I get into that question, I want to know, is there anything else that you think people should know about that you're doing in 1 week season that would make them want to join 1 week season?
Oh man, so I could talk for another hour about that. But if you're interested in this theory, yeah, I know. If you're interested in the theory stuff, we're extremely heavy on theory at 1 week season. These are new games, even going to DFS. Like, we have 12, 13 years of DFS. We have like 5, 6 years of best ball. Like, these are new games. If we were to find the theoretical optimal Nash equilibrium of these games, it would take another 1,000 years, literally, to get enough data to do that. So what we're doing is we're looking to build edges. And I would say the single most important thing to take away, and I is what do you win when you're right? So an example I'll give theoretically, and then an example
the ultimate DFS question.
Yes, and that is super important in these games, because we have to be basing our game plan and how we're approaching them based off of what we win when we're right. And we have to bring that into our game plan development and how we're attacking these contests. The theoretical way that I kind of teach and I talk about this is by utilizing a computer programming tool of if-then statements. Those that are familiar with programming or have some background in mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, you'll see those a lot. If-then statements. So if this happens, then this happens. If X, Y, Z variables are satisfied, then it spits out A, B, C. The way that we want to kind of use this in best ball and DFS is utilizing the what do I win when I'm right statement. So back to the first round last year, if Christian McCaffrey gets hurt, then what happens? Well, then all the players around his ADP are going to increase in advancement rate, and his backup is going to increase in advancement rate. So utilizing the if-then statements, I think, is the easiest way.
And Brock Purdy is going to throw more to his receiving options.
Yeah. So utilize that thought process when we're drafting BBM. So what is it saying when I draft Jamar Chase? It's not just saying that the Bengals repeat last year and he has another historical receiving season. It's saying this offense finishes as a top 2-3 unit. What else does that influence? That probably also influences Joe Burrow. That probably also influences Chase Brown. Mike Gesicki is a player that's kind of forgot about in that offense, but has spike week potential. Another example, if I draft CeeDee Lamb in the first round, what is that also saying? That's saying CeeDee Lamb outperforms the guys around him. That says that the Dallas Cowboys might lead the league in pass attempts this year. Who does that also benefit? That also benefits probably Jake Ferguson, Dak Prescott. That also benefits Jesus, what's his name? George Pickens. What does that say? Also, like, probably the backfield is not going to be as beneficial to us in best ball if they're leading the league in pass attempts. So, like, going down the full rabbit hole of like,
And
this
I got to
happens,
interrupt because you also have to compare that to the ADP,
yes,
right? In other words, I think you can have plenty of Javonte Williams. I'm not a Jaden Blue guy, and I'm not a Miles Sanders guy. I think it's my bets. It's going to be, that's who they brought in to be the lead guy. Without an injury, he's going to be the lead guy. He's so cheap that even if the passing game is good, he can still pay off.
For advancement rate, probably not where it matters most. I would push back.
Okay, which leads to one of the most important things I want to talk about when you interview me. So, and it's how to trick the pods. Okay, so that is something we're going to talk about.
That sounds very interesting. Save that.
Yeah, I will. Just write it down. How do you plan on tricking the pods? So the other thing that I have been doing is I've made a bet against Barkley, Bijan, and Derrick Henry up front. Mm-hmm. Okay, Gibbs is really, and Jonty, but Gibbs is really the only running back that I'm going to be even weight on early, because I think the drop off at wide receiver, if you don't have a Jefferson, a Lamb, a Brian Thomas, a Neighbors, a Puka, I think you're going to be bleeding points more at wide receiver than you will at run. I think you'll be able to cobble running back together. I think the field is overreacting to how good of a running back year we had last year.
Yeah, and I think it went down to like injury rates.
Yeah, so what I'm doing much more of is since I don't want to take Bijan and Barkley that often, I want to have some. I want to have 3 to 4%. But since I only have 3 to 4% of them, who am I taking when I'm not taking them? Well, CeeDee Lamb is my favorite. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want 30% CeeDee, 25% of a guy who could get hurt. And I've already talked about advance rate, being either supercharged or crushed based on injury early. So what I'm doing is I am taking Puka, Neighbors, Brian Thomas, at that 2, 3, 4 spot occasionally, just to give them different, instead of pushing up guys from the end of the second round into end of the second, early third, where I think there's kind of a valley drop off. Mm-hmm. I think, early second, so if I'm pushing Tyreek up, if I'm pushing Higgins up, if I'm pushing Devontae up to get unique at the, I'm passing on Drake London, I'm passing on A.J. Brown, and I'm passing on Ladd McConkey, 3 guys I'm really high on, right? So instead of doing that, to get more Puka, to get more Neighbors, I'm pushing them up into that area of Barkley. Are you doing anything like that?
Yes. And one of the most interesting things I think you said there was you didn't want to have 25 or 30% like these guys, and injury could ruin it. I think you can go both ways with that discussion. You just have to understand what you're doing. If you're going heavy, like we'll say, if you're going over double the field on a player in the first 7 rounds, you are increasing variance immensely. That's not necessarily a terrible thing. You just have to understand what you're doing. And because the variance in these contests is like borderline infinite, I think that's fine. If you understand what you're doing, and if you want to have 30% a player in the first 3 rounds, for example, I think it's fine. You just have to understand like what you're doing.
I never do. This is and I've had this disagreement with a lot of people just as smart as you, and a lot of them end up coming back to my point because they got that injury.
Yeah,
right. And then all of a sudden you're looking at a 7% advance rate, a 10% advance rate overall, just because one guy got hurt in this. So my saying is always the difference between CeeDee Lamb and anyone else in the first round is nowhere near as important. In other words, like if you did projections and you thought that CeeDee was going to have this monster year, and let's say you're right, he would have. He was on pace for it, but then he got hurt, right? What you lose is way more than what you know, what do you win when you win? What you lose when that guy gets hurt is way more than you win. And I'll point to the fact that look at the advance rates on Barkley and Henry, but neither of them were the guy you needed week 17 because they were gone week 15, week 16. So the nature of the pod to me is the final nail in that I want to be risky, right? Because anyway, that's my thought. Sorry. I know I interrupt you a lot, but that's
no.
That's the pod experience.
I'll close it with this. Part of game theory is human interaction. And in that human interaction, we have to get into psychology. So human psychology, crowd psychology, what are people likely to do given certain circumstances? And in game theory, and game theory came about in the 50s. So it's 60, 70 years old at this point. But so too did human psychology, crowd psychology. It's all kind of new stuff, right? Over the last 70 years, there have been numerous studies that found human beings, when presented with a problem that they have to solve, are much more likely to emphasize what they stand to lose as opposed to what they stand to gain. In that discussion, if 95% of the field in these contests is thinking about what they stand to lose, I kind of want to be in the 5% that is aiming to win balls out or nothing. So I think
that is a very fair pushback on what I said. I still disagree, but I think it's a very fair pushback. So we're going to do the bonus round. I got a question for you from the Spike Week Discord. I don't know if they were serious, but I'm going to ask that, and then I'm going to ask you 2 or 3 other quick questions, and then we're going to get out of here.
Sounds good.
Keep each one to kind of yes, no with a sentence after.
Okay.
In general, do you believe in putting 2 running backs from the same team on the same fantasy best ball team? I've come up with the term stack cuffing. I do it a lot with Pollard and Spears. Mm-hmm. Do you like doing that? And if so, the question I got in the Spike Week Discord is, would you do it with the Commanders this year?
Yeah, it depends on cost for me. A team I will do that with. You mentioned the Titans. I don't like them as much because they're expected to be a bottom half of the unit offense. Teams that their ADPs are cheap and they could be a top 15 offense. The Chicago Bears, I love doing it with them this season. So DeAndre Swift, and I like Roschon Johnson as the most likely guy to be like the goal line dude. The Jacksonville Jaguars, I love doing it with. So I prefer doing it with Bashal Tutin and Tank Bigsby, the 2 cheapest ones. And another example, I like doing it with the Washington Commanders. So yeah, yes to that question. And I'll take both Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler, or McCroskey, or whatever the hell his name is at the end.
So what I don't do is what you just described. I invented stack cuffing, supposedly. I was the first to write about it back in the day. I want situations where it's a 2-team backfield. Pollard, Spears, right? I don't want that third guy. I don't do it as much with Tracy and Scatterbo because Singletary's still there. What do you win when you win? I want it to be, the price is very important. So you got that right. But I want to win. If one of them gets hurt, I want the other one to be like a 3rd round value, a 2nd round value. Give me those huge spike weeks. So I've been doing it with Pollard and Spears. I've been doing it with Mason and Jones. I've been doing it with Trevion Henderson and Ramondre.
Mm-hmm.
to where I think both of them can pay off. The key to me is I want both to be able to pay off their ADP without an injury. But if I get that injury, man, that one guy who I drafted in the 5th round, 6th round to the 15th round is now the league winner. So that's kind of my thing on stack cuffing. Joe Mixon, how far does he have to drop with this foot injury for you to be interested? And do you think Rashee Rice has fallen enough?
I did not have a lot of Joe Mixon before 2 days ago. But I think I did 10 BBM drafts in the last day and a half. I've seen Joe Mixon down in the mid 70s, and I'm like, dude, I'm jumping on that. This is a guy that, like, he played through 2 separate foot ankle injuries last season. I don't think that Nick Chubb is anything special. I don't think they have anybody else on that roster. I think Joe Mixon is probably set up well to see another high volume role. And now that he is dropping, and I just didn't take him because, like, I loved the wide receivers in that range more. Like, I've been hammering like Juwan Jennings, Chris Olave, even all the way down to like Stephon Diggs, I would say. And they go like,
I agree.
2 rounds
more drop off at wide
later.
receiver. To me, Mixon would have to be an 8th, 9th rounder for me to, be willing to take the risk on the injury. And as we get closer to the season, he might be.
I'm buying in the 7th. I'll
Okay.
say that. Yeah.
Fair. I mean, there's just so many guys like Caleb Johnson in the 7th.
Yeah. DeAndre Swift, we mentioned.
Yeah.
Isaiah Pacheco.
Best Ball on Call mentioned he doesn't hate the Pittsburgh double tap. That's one I definitely do. I just gave a few off the top of my head. But basically for me, stack cuffing is 2 guys drafted 6th round, approximately 5th, 6th round or later, especially like it when the first end is in the 7th, 8th round, the first guy of the 2. You're nailing the backfield. And both guys, you say, wow, they both could beat, like Pollard and Spears could both beat ADP easily. One could get hurt for a couple games. The other could get hurt for a couple games. One week, one guy could give you 12 points. The next week, the other one could. But if you get that injury, boy, now you're set up for some serious volume. That's going to do it for this one. Find Mark over at 1 Week Season. This was one of my favorite talks of the year. Mark, I am really excited to have you reverse the role, question me, and interrupt me as I'm talking with your loud opinions as we move forward. Use the code DAYLIGHT at myffpc.com. Save 25% on your first league. That's going to do it, guys. Thanks for joining us. Have a good day.